in a new age Mountain West, New Mexico, to propel themselves into a position of long-term success. We're talking about a program that has not had a lot of long-term success since the Rocky Long days, right? Long term, if you could just stack a couple good hires together, you can put yourself in a really good position to succeed long term, right? You just need to have that winning success, get that winning bug in you, right? Because I think there's NIL there. I think that there's enough talent there in the surrounding states. Geography, it's not the best geography, but like it's enough, and like when you got a lot of teams like Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, San Diego State, Utah State, all leaving to go to the Pac-12 in 2026. The door's open. All right. You hired Bronco Mendenhall last year. He was a home run hire, right? So home run, in fact, that he went to go coach at Utah State the following year. All right. Bummer. Oh, well. Now you look forward. You have a new AD, right, who gets hired, and he's only got a couple weeks to figure it out, right? And he pulls a guy by the name of Jason Eck from Idaho out of his butt. And guess what? Hand up. I think I like the hire a lot. Oh, see, I think your mic's muted. Hot
Damn it,
start.
bro. Right from the beginning. No, listen, what's not to like about it? I mean, we've talked about and covered a bunch of these FCS coaches making the jump to D1. Yeah, why not bring some of your coaching staff with you, bring some of your players with you, and have that culture kind of be thrown right in there. Also, to have some stability, a guy with head coaching experience who's succeeded in places that's maybe harder to succeed in the past too. Plus, coming from Idaho, I mean the dome, right? The Kibby Dome, like what an awesome college venue, and he helped, kind of bring that back, and that's just selfishly why I love that. But yeah, it's fun. I think there's some buzz around the program. Obviously, the basketball program did its thing in the Mountain West with Richard Pitino. He goes and heads out of there, and so is Bronco Mendenhall, and I think there's kind of a void and a gap. It's like if you're a Lobo fan, you're kind of hungry. You've had a taste of success with Mendenhall, like getting to 5-7, right? Winning some big time games, having a very fun offense, and kind of going through that. And obviously, you followed up with your basketball, but now you've got two empty coaches, and I think there's opportunity for Eck to come in here and kind of capitalize on some of that momentum that was being built and that void that's left in Lobo athletics that he can kind of put his stamp on. And also, he talked about too, like the void that is in that geographic region with New Mexico and New Mexico State being the only two, right, FBS schools in that state. And then also there's 0 G5 schools in Arizona right next door too. So like there's a lot of geographic area. Obviously it's not crazy. It's not, West or East Texas. It's not, Metro Georgia, Metro Atlanta, all that kind of stuff. But it is still plenty of talent there that Eck has had success recruiting from New Mexico and also from the Phoenix area, especially in Arizona. It's really interesting. This is a spot too where, and we'll talk about a little bit with expectations, but with the changing, conference alignments, where all of a sudden you've got some schools, heading up to the Pac-12 or the revamped Pac-12, and you're opening up a pretty big void in the Mountain West. What will become of it with 9 schools right now? I'm sure they will add one more, and to get to 10, and there you go. And now you got New Mexico sitting there with opportunities to kind of go forward and be a contender in their conference and be a spot where you have some of the better resources in your conference.
Yeah, and like I think it's very fair if you're sitting here and you're like, okay, you just talked about Jimmy Rogers, going to Washington State, and Matthew, you were maybe not, you were a little bit hesitant, a little bit skeptical, all right, and maybe it's not fair to be more skeptical about Jimmy Rogers taking over Washington State than it is to be skeptical about Jason Eck taking over New Mexico. But I mean, they're very comparable people, right? One is just offensive minded, one's defensive minded. All right, they both worked at South Dakota State together. They were coordinators together. They both ended up taking over programs and having a lot of success. While Jimmy Rogers took over an already powerhouse at defending national champion South Dakota State, led them to another national champion. Jason Eck took an Idaho team that was dead in the water. Dead. After they moved down to the FCS, their program blew up. All right, they hadn't had a winning season since 2016 until Eck got there in 2022, and he took them to the playoffs 3 straight years. 3 straight years. I love what he's about. He wins the press conference for sure, but I also think that his offenses that he brings are fairly interesting. All right, you look at the metrics for Idaho, and it was their offense was complemented by an also very effective defense and some talent over there on that side of the ball. But you look at the offense and you're like, and you watch it go down. You're like, it's kind of explosive, when it needs to be. And that's what Bronco Mendenhall got right last year. Bronco Mendenhall, big defensive guy. We were expecting, more of a Rocky Long look, that 3-3-5 that him and Bronco Mendenhall used to run, way back when New Mexico was successful. But that did not work. All right. What worked was explosive plays on offense, and staying in ball games with explosive guys like Devin Dampier. I'm not saying that's necessarily the formula to win in New Mexico, because Rocky Long showed you that you can go a different route and win with a lot of great defense. The history of Rocky Long there is pretty awesome too. If you guys ever get a chance to read about that, I'm sure there's a lot of fans here that are listening that already know all the stuff about Rocky Long and why he's an absolute dog. But the point I'm trying to make is that Jason Eck, I think, is going to be a very, very good replacement. And if you stack this hire on top of the Bronco Mendenhall hire, I think you're in business, man. You look at Jason Eck's resume. He wins. He's got a creative offense. We'll talk about his staff in a little bit. And even that South Dakota State program, right? Like before 2016, when him and Jimmy Rogers were both, Jimmy Rogers promoted to defensive coordinator and Jason Eck was moved to be the offensive coordinator there. Like that program was pretty stagnant until both Jason Eck and Jimmy Rogers were in the building at the same time. Then they kind of went on a tear. Jason Eck was not a part of the national championship team because he went on to go coach for Idaho and have lots of success there. But you can definitely tell that there was a huge blip in offensive production when Jason Eck walked into the building and when Jimmy Rogers became the defensive coordinator there. He's also worked with a lot of other great talents as well. Jason Eck is not short of connections, right? He's not short of proven productivity from smaller programs. He's not short of a creative offense. Jason Eck, all right? Let's just remember that name, all right? I think there's a really good chance that Jason Eck could go on to do really great things in college football.
Without a doubt. You talked about, the connection there to Jimmy Rogers. We gave him credit yesterday for having some of those Jackrabbits at South Dakota State being drafted. And obviously, like, he deserves a lot of that credit too. But a lot of those guys were offensive guys who were working under Eck, who were coached and developed by him. You're thinking about Dallas Goddard. You're thinking about Pierre Strong, the running back, the quarterback, Chris Oladokan, in his short time there with the Jackrabbits, elevating that program and also, elevating that offense and, all those talents and whatever it may be. It's pretty darn impressive and what he did. He also, worked at Minnesota State too, Mankato. And guess who he worked with? The defensive coordinator he worked with was Jake Dickert, who we just talked about in last episode too, also going to Wake Forest. What a small world this has been. He's worked and been surrounded by a ton of great coaches. It started all the way back in the 90s when he was an offensive lineman. I think it was reserve offensive lineman, but offensive lineman for was Barry Alvarez and Wisconsin, who's a legendary coach there in the Midwest, and especially at Wisconsin. What he did, he got his start there as a GA. Obviously started building some connections. We'll get to some of that with his staff when we talk about that later, but it's pretty fun. I mean, his first head coaching job was Idaho. He gets his feet wet. He builds, a pretty good roster and has success and succeeds there. And it was very, very impressive what he did at Idaho and all that. I know we started getting into Eck. You were the one that was pounding the table and you're like, look into him, see what's going on here. And listen, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. And Eck's also, I love the energy that's kind of surrounding that program. I'm just kind of getting my feet wet and dipping into the media there and seeing what the fan base is going on there. It sounds like there's good energy. He's a very likable dude. You talked about it too off air, how fun and engaging he is with his press conferences. Also a new change in Lobo media rights coverage and Lobo football community coverage. It's a lot more open this year than with Bronco Mendenhall. Mendenhall has the credibility and whatever else to kind of close it down. Okay, let us work. I'm going to do my thing here, whatever it may be. And obviously he kind of earned that right with what he did at BYU and Virginia. Here comes Eck, and he's like, no, let's promote our school. Let's drive fundraising. Let's drive NIL. Let's get this media access. We've got a good team here. Let's get it promoted and all these things here. I think the media is finding to really enjoy covering Eck And honestly, I think they will, especially with the style of offense he plays, as well as, maybe the production and the wins and the bowl games that you haven't been to in a long, long time for New Mexico. It's been what, almost 10, kind of almost 10 years now, almost a decade since those New Mexico bowl games in the mid 2010s. So yeah, it's the second time. Real quick before I let you get into some of your more notes into some of his other resume stuff he's been at, his contract, right? It is a big time investment, not only
Yeah.
for Eck. I mean, fantastic for him. He talked about how much it means to him. You brought this up too off air, like how emotional he got, and like the reality of like being able to make over $1 million when he struggled for a long time. Him and his family talked about where like she or his wife would be grocery shopping and have to call him and be like, "Hey, like, are we gonna have? Can I write a check for this, or do I have to put it on the credit card?" And he's like, "You should probably put it on the credit card because we just don't have the funds right now." And amazing for him, he gets a 5-year deal, $1.15 million to start out with. It increases by about 50K a year. So fantastic for him. In a couple years, it's right now it's just under what Bronco Mendenhall made last year, and that was a huge investment for the New Mexico program. It was the highest paid coach they've ever had. Obviously, Mendenhall deserves that in the accolades and everything else he did there, but this is a big commitment for them. I think what helps too is you get some of that buyout money that Utah State had to pay you, and you can kind of funnel that into Jason Eck. But holy cow, this is a big deal. And I look at the new Mountain West in terms of what it will be in 2026 and beyond. You're talking about Air Force, Hawaii, Nevada, New Mexico, NIU, San Jose State, UNLV as we stand right now. We'll see if that changes. UTEP and Wyoming. So the new ads, right, are NIU and UTEP with a couple of the former Mountain West schools heading to the Pac-12. You look at that there, and it's first of all, a lot smaller names in terms of no Boise State, no Fresno State, no Utah State, no Colorado State, some of the guys that have been the heavy hitters, no San Diego State, some of the heavy hitters in the Mountain West, and also financially too. You look at who's making what. Like if the Mountain West started today in 2026, like it would be UNLV and what Dan Mullen makes, but we'll see if he stays in. And then it's Jason Eck. You are right at the top of your conference there. That's why I talked about when we talk about expectations right now. I think in year 2025, it will be different than what it is in 2026 and beyond.
Agreed. And the thing I also like about Jason Eck too is like one, you got to play the media game right for NIL. Like the two are pretty dang correlated, right? And getting into that local media and having them like you and then reporting you in a positive light, and you're shining light on that program, like more money will pour in, right? But that's not the most important thing that I want to bring up regarding NIL and personnel. Jason Eck understands like that personnel is so key to winning football games, right? Like he's not shy about talking about like we need good players to come here. We do. We need players that can play here. We need players that can play here, right? But also play at a lot of other really great schools in the country, right? You need to have 24, 25 guys that can come in and be big impacts at not only New Mexico but at other schools as well. So I'm like, good. He gets it, right? Because personnel in the G5 can get you a long way. Now, coaching, right, is massive, right? And we talk about some of the greater coaches in G5 and how they've been able to elevate their players. But because in the G5, like, there's a lot more parity in terms of the talent. If you can separate yourself a little bit in that conference from the bottom half of that conference, which right now you're in the bottom half, right? That's just what it is. All right. But Albuquerque is a great location. All right. Maybe not to everyone, right? But you got a good airport, right? That you can travel really easily to other places to recruit, where kids can fly in really easily. You got the surrounding states that you talked about Arizona. I mean, West Texas. You're going to be able to dip into that a little bit. The state of New Mexico isn't terrible either. You have some good talent there. It's not like Las Cruces, right? Like we're just like actually in the middle of nowhere, So which neat town, right? But I think you're set up to be in a better position with your geography than the other team in your state. So, and Jason Eck too, like I just love the way he talks, man. Was it accountability, toughness, grit, and urgency? Right, urgency is a key one, right? Like you don't have a lot of time. You've got a year to figure this thing out right before this new Mountain West comes, and you need to be on top of your game, and you need to be on top of from a resource allocation perspective, from a personnel perspective, from a coaching perspective. You need to have your culture established and ready to go so that you can dominate in that era. Believe me, New Mexico Lobo fans, like, you guys can dominate in the future, this new Mountain West, right? And I think Jason Eck has a really good shot at doing it. From an offensive perspective, all right, so they're bringing over Jack Lane, who's the quarterback there over at Idaho, but last year they won 10 games using two different quarterbacks because Jack Lane got hurt for a lot of the season. And then you had to bring in their backup, who, quite frankly, was not that good. Jack Lane was significantly better, and he only played in like six, he only started in 6 games, you know? So he was also the coach that got Dallas Goedert drafted. You talked about South Dakota State, some of those offensive players getting drafted, and he's a big proponent. Like most offensive coaches, when you ask him about his scheme, he's like, well, my scheme is to give the best players the ball. My scheme is to, fit my players fit the players that we have into the correct system that best represents their skills and all that stuff. And he's done that in the past. Like, a lot of that's like coach speak normally. Like, oh yeah, we fit our offense to fit our players. That doesn't always happen, right? But you can see it with Jason Eck that that's what happens, And then from a defensive perspective, we'll get in the staff. Like, Idaho had some good defenses, and you have some continuity on that staff there as well. I mean, they held Oregon to 400 yards of offense, which sounds like a lot, but 1 of 3 on fourth down, and Oregon had to have Dylan Gabriel to throw the ball 49 times in that game to win, right? Not to mention Idaho scored on 2 awesome trick plays, in that game. So it's like just the creativity of Eck and the willingness to lay it all on the line, him game in and game out. And I think players are excited about playing in that offense and having the possibilities, a lot of power, a lot of trap, a lot of motion, a lot of vertical threats. Like, they push the ball down the field, and Jack Lane will be able to do that too when he gets there. So it'll be about bringing in that personnel, see what they can do this year. The schedule for this upcoming season, you have some possible wins on there. You do. And I think getting those wins is going to be a very important step in terms of turning this whole thing around for New Mexico. So I'm just a big fan, man. I'm just a big fan.
Yeah, you talk about that too, especially offensively. They're bringing in some pretty darn good running backs, right? And also interior offensive line. Those are a couple of positions of strengths that he feels good about, and us too looking at that is something they can lean on, especially in year one, to have some of those strong position groups right away before spring practice even starts. Right during spring practice is fantastic. What a luxury there. He talked about the importance of galvanizing this community, in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. Albuquerque, you talked about it's a big town. It's a city. It's a big city. It's almost 1 million in the metro area. There's a lot of people, I think, that are ready to start following a sports school. There's no professional sports team in New Mexico, right? So, like, you have an opportunity, a void there potentially that you can build. That you saw how much the pit, right, the basketball stadium, how much that got engaged and rallied behind a good product. Eck knows that. You put something good together, they will come watch it, the Lobo fans. And that's obviously big time for recruiting, for resource allocation, and revenue. Just driving that in is something that's phenomenal and important now more than ever in college football. It's not just about your scheme and your X's and O's and whatever it may be, and ability to teach players. While those are all important, there's a lot that goes into being a head coach. I think Eck understands that, and something that has impressed us is his humility with that, and understanding that, this is all that needs to go down. And two, is also awareness to be able to make that happen in his early tenure so far. If I can, I'll get into the offense or the coaching staff here. Similar to, Washington State and whatever else, you're going to have a lot of guys follow him over from Idaho, which I think is fantastic. Shows a lot of continuity there. And also, the reality that he wanted some guys to bring over. The offense coordinator is also going to be coaching quarterbacks is Luke Schlesner. I'm sorry if I botched that there. He was the same position, coach quarterbacks and offense coordinator at Idaho. He coached with Eck at South Dakota State as well before that, coaching tight ends there. So he specifically worked with Dallas Goedert and all that stuff. Before that, he coached at North Dakota when he was OC wide receivers coach. When he was wide receivers coach, He coached Kenny Galladay there, and then all the way back to Minnesota State Mankato, which is where, you know, um, X started, in one of his earlier jobs, but the different overlap there. But he coached Adam Thielen there as wide receiver coach. So like he has worked with some of the best alumni that has come out of these very small schools. Fantastic stuff there. And obviously Eck will have his hand involved in a lot of the offense as well. So no surprises there. The O-line coach will be Cody Booth. He played offensive line at Temple. He also played in the NFL with the Bears, the Jaguars, and the Washington Commanders. He comes over from Idaho with Eck. Right, so there's that continuity there between the O-line coach, offensive coordinator, and the head coach. Tight end coach, he played at Miami. Was most recently at Ball State coaching tight ends, and also the OC there was a head coach, so he's got head coach experience at Western Illinois before that. The running backs coach is John Johnson. He was the running backs coach at Sam Houston State. He overlapped with Eck and Schlesner as their running back coach back at South Dakota State. And then the wide receiver coach is Clint Lockett. He was wide receiver coach at UC Davis this past season, has also been at Oregon and Washington and San Diego State. It's kind of been all around. He was a DB coach at St. John Bosco in California. That's big time. He played wide receiver at San Diego State and also played in the NFL with the Bengals and the Commanders. So overall, pretty good offensive staff, right? I mean, kind of what you want and whatever it may be. Obviously, Eck will have a lot of influence and, power and whatever it may be in that offense and in that staff. So you expect it to be a good one. People want to play for him. People want to play and coach for him. So obviously, so far so good.
Yeah, and look, Walter White taught us how important it is to have chemistry in New Mexico, and I think that's what you're going to have here on the offense side of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving the defense side of the ball, you're going to run more of a 4-2-5. He kind of talked about more so when you have that one high safety look. You're going to emphasis is around stopping the run there with that one high look. So the defense coordinator will be Spence Nowinski. So he was the defense coordinator at Ohio a couple years ago. He helped turn around that program with Tim Albin. Tim Albin actually, when he was talking to Eck, he credits, Nowinski as a guy that saved his job when he was there and they were struggling, at Ohio, and he comes in and, boom, 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 kind of takes over for him. So that's kind of good stuff there. He was also a GA with Eck at Wisconsin back in the 90s, 1999, 2001, under Barry Alvarez there, right? He was also, this past season, was the co-defensive coordinator at Memphis. So obviously not great production there, but other spots he has done good. Defensive backs coach is Stanley Franks. Was the cornerbacks coach at Idaho the past 3 seasons. He was quality control for defense, with Jake Dickert back at Washington State. So there's that kind of connection between Dickert and, Eck, who they were back at Minnesota State Mankato. The defensive lines coach is Hebron Loney Fangupo, right? So he was the defensive line coach at Idaho. Defensive analyst at Texas Southern before that. He also played at USC and at BYU, so has college football experience. He also played 4 years in the NFL. Safeties coach is Clay Bignell. He was the defensive coordinator at Southern Miss and Eastern Illinois before coming to New Mexico. He spent time at Vandy, Notre Dame, and Northwestern, and he played at Montana State a while ago. And lastly, the special teams coordinator is Daniel DePrado. He's also going to be the associate head coach. He was the special teams coordinator and the associate head coach back at Texas State this past season. So familiarity and comfortability with the two roles he's going to be being in the 2025 season.
Look, we don't know how this is going to work out, right? Some of the continuity works. It's not as much continuity as you see with Jimmy Rogers over there with Washington State, or Bronco Mendenhall bringing his staff to Utah State, right? But we'll see how it plays out. It's impossible to know because half these guys could be gone next year, moving on to other places. Coaching turnovers tough. But it is important, I think, that we wait, for some of these coaching hires to see how the staff is filled out, to see, how these guys are going to be building out their teams. So we'll see. Now, it's tough having. It's either tough or a good thing at New Mexico when you have 3 coaches in 3 years, right? And because you're paying him a lot more, right? Well, one you've fired, right, Danny Gonzalez. Then the second coach you hired, ended up getting hired to another job because he was spectacular. And then now you're looking over at Jason Eck coming in. So you're third coach in 3 years. I guess what's the expectation for him, right? Because we're going to grade him, right? We'll give you our grades. An A, right? Obviously, we talk about this. If you guys hear us talk about this all the time, then sorry. Or if you haven't, then go watch our other videos. But the way we do our grading, it's A, B, or C, right? It's A is he's going to exceed expectations, B is he'll meet expectations, and C is he will not meet expectations, more than likely, in our opinions, right? Which are obviously professional opinions. My expectation is actually pretty high for New Mexico. But I think the expectation for the program for, the athletic department and, fans right now is to win 4 or 5 games, a season, which may not be doable in the first year. Maybe, who knows? Bronco Mendenhall did a great job getting guys in there and finding ways to win games. And your schedule, in fact, is a little bit favorable. You have some wins on there, but I think 4 to 5 wins every year. Like if you make a bowl game at New Mexico, like that's a big deal. Like that's exceeding expectations. Now, that doesn't mean we won't be able to recalibrate expectations a couple years from now when the Mountain West is restructured and whatnot. So I'd say right now, from 2025, for this upcoming season, I think you can expect 3 to 4 wins, right? That's a good expectation. And then after that, I think you can start having conversations about like, man, is the expectation that we're going to win 5 games, maybe make a bowl game? I think that's fair to start having those kind of expectations for Jason Eck in the years 2026 and beyond. So for that reason, I I get this hire B plus. I think this is a great hire. I think this was one of the better ones that you were going to get for this program and in the position that they're at. I find it amazing that they're able to invest, that much money in a college football coach. You just don't see that a lot, from the G5 level. A lot of coaches getting over $1 million. I know, in the news, if you're not a New Mexico fan or a G5 fan of a school, I think not a lot of people understand. They see the money that's being thrown around in college football. They don't understand that money is for only a couple different schools, It's those Power Four schools that those guys are consistently making over $1 million. So the fact that they're pouring in over $1 million, I think that also tells you that they expect to win with Jason Eck. So I think my expectations are pretty high, but I think there's a better chance that he exceeds expectations than he doesn't meet expectations.
For sure. I will say, like, I think, like you said, in 2025, the expectations, like, nationally are super low. I think Vegas odds are super low. You talked about, their potential win total being something we will be monitoring over the summer and seeing if we can get our. So, real quick plug here, check out our Twitter at the Redshirt Soft, figuring out what's going to happen there because we might be on getting some action in New Mexico's favor with how low it is and especially with their schedule favorability. Plus, we think that they're bringing in some good talent and like, yes, you have a lot of places and faces to kind of, change and like get adapted to. I get that. But yeah, my expectation for New Mexico is 3 wins, 3 to 5 wins, 3 to 4 wins. I think in this season in the Mountain West as it is right now, as you move into the new Mountain West, I am like bowl game or bust in that point. And maybe it's just my, a little bias coming in here because I do think Eck will have this program in a better spot in 12 months from now than it is right now. So I think your expectations could change just a little bit in terms of, yeah, it's in a better spot and it's continuing to grow and build off some momentum and honestly springboard you into a spot where you are a contender in the Mountain West. And I think too, also we get caught up on wins, and which fair, like very fair if you're a fan, like that's the important thing. But like in the G5 level, especially at New Mexico, like your out of conference schedule matters, right? You could have 2 big time games or 3 big time games, or you could have one or none, right? That's the difference between going to a bowl game and not sometimes In 2025, you've got Michigan and UCLA both on the road. Games you will probably be 3 touchdowns or more underdogs in. Not expecting you to win those, but you also have Idaho State and you also have New Mexico State. The Aggies there too. So like those are 2 home games that are very winnable in a conference. And then it's just about winning a couple, maybe 1 or 2 more Mountain West games, and you put yourself in a spot to be in November fighting for a bowl game, which is all you can really ask for, I think, especially in year 1 of Eck.
So your grade same as
Oh,
mine.
yeah, I'll go B plus.
I think that's fair, man. Like we're not saying like that. This could be a home run hire, right? This absolutely could be. You know, because we both have our expectations raised based on the resources that they're allocating to this coach and the new Mountain West. We don't know how this is all going to break down in the
Yeah,
Mountain West. Like you could have several new teams a couple years from now, like after recording this, that we don't even know about yet. You
Sacramento
know,
State.
yeah, who knows? So we don't know what that landscape's going to look like exactly. So maybe it's not fair to raise our expectations, based on that. But because of that, we're not going to give it an A. But I think a B plus is fair. Like, yeah, he's probably going to exceed people's expectations, which I think is awesome. And I will be, yeah, 1.5 was what it opened at like BetMGM or something. Come on, over 1.5 wins. What are we talking about here?
Well, the other thing too is, and I say this and it sucks, but I'm sorry, New Mexico fans. Like this, and I know neither of these 2 options are very appealing to New Mexico fans. I would be a lot more surprised if he gets fired as opposed to hired away for more money at a different job and maybe a Power Four conference. To me, he seems a guy that's just going to work here with a good enough floor with what he did at Idaho, and also too with upside. Like I would not be surprised if in 3 years you're telling me that they're winning 8 games. And obviously a lot has to happen and change and whatever else. Like there's going to be 70 new players, 80 new players on that team in 2027 than it is, right now as we stand. So obviously it's hard to kind of pinpoint that exactly. I just wouldn't be surprised if he starts turning this thing around quicker than maybe some people give him credit for.